My name is Alara, and I am 60 years old. For 35 of those years, I built a bespoke culinary empire from the ground up, a business that catered to presidents and poets, to gala openings and quiet, intimate anniversaries. My hands, though now showing the fine, paper-thin skin of age, have plated dishes that became legends in our city. I am, by any objective measure, a successful woman. But for most of my life, to my only son, Liam, I was not a mother, an artist, or a mentor. I was a resource. A safety net woven from gold thread, meant to be used and used until it frayed, but never to be admired for its own craftsmanship. This realization didn't come like a lightning strike. It was a slow, creeping dawn that took decades to break, and when it finally did, it illuminated a landscape of quiet exploitation I had mistaken for love. The story of my emancipation, as I now call it, began not with a shout, but with the cold, heavy weight of a diamond ring in a velvet box. It's funny how an object meant to symbolize eternal love can become the very catalyst for its end. My relationship with Liam had always been one-sided, a river flowing in a single direction. I was the source, and he was the delta, his life widening and branching out, fed entirely by my current. It started in his childhood, as these things often do. I was a single mother, pouring every ounce of my energy into my fledgling catering business. The hours were brutal. I'd come home smelling of thyme and roasted garlic, my feet aching, to find a sitter watching my son. I compensated for my absence with presents of a different kind, material. The best schools, the newest gadgets, the most expensive summer camps. I see now that I wasn't just assuaging my guilt. I was building the foundation of his entitlement. A memory that surfaces often, unbidden, is of his 16th birthday. I had saved for a year to buy him a reliable, safe, second-hand car. It was parked in the driveway with a giant red bow. He walked out, took one look at the sensible sedan, and his face fell. His friend, whose father was a surgeon, had just gotten a brand new sports car. "It's nice, Mom," he'd said, the disappointment a physical thing between us. He barely drove it, preferring to get rides with his friends. The car sat in the driveway, a monument to my miscalculation. I hadn't given him a gift. I had failed to meet an expectation I myself had set. This pattern solidified in college. The tuition for his private university was astronomical, a figure I would look at on the payment portal and feel a wave of nausea. Yet, I paid it without complaint. It was an investment in his future, I told myself. Alongside tuition, there were the living expenses. His dorm wasn't good enough. He needed an off-campus apartment with his friends. The meal plan was disgusting. He needed a monthly allowance for groceries and restaurants that, I would later learn, was spent mostly on bars and concert tickets. I'd see the charges on the credit card I gave him for emergencies: $200 at a steakhouse, $300 on designer jeans. Each time, I'd swallow my protest, telling myself, he's finding himself. He just needs to get through school. When he graduated with a degree in business, I felt a surge of pride and relief. This was it. The investment would now pay dividends. He would get a job, start his own life, and our relationship could finally shift from provider and dependent to one of mutual respect between adults. For 6 months, he lived at home, job searching. His version of this involved sleeping until noon and sending out a few resumes a week to companies he felt were worthy of his talent. The rejections, or more often the silence, made him bitter. It was the economy's fault, the hiring manager's fault, never his. To help him get on his feet, I gave him seed money for a startup. It was an app for rating craft breweries. The initial investment was $50,000. It vanished in less than a year, spent on high-end tech, a fancy shared office space he rarely used, and networking events that were little more than glorified parties. When the money was gone, the project was quietly abandoned. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the loss. It was simply a failed venture, my failed venture. Then came Chloe. When Liam introduced us, I was cautiously optimistic. She was bright, ambitious, and seemed to adore him. I thought she would be the anchor he needed. She was an anchor, all right. She just anchored him more firmly to my bank account. Chloe came from a family of moderate means, but she had exceptionally expensive taste. Her mother, Brenda, was a woman who seemed to perpetually perform a version of herself she thought was wealthy. They saw Liam not just as a charming young man, but as the heir to my success. They saw me as the key to the life they craved. They were far more strategic than my son had ever been. After they married, the requests became more structured. It was no longer about a few $100s on a credit card. It was about a down payment on a house in a gated community I couldn't afford when I was their age. 30% of the home's value, to be exact. A gift, they called it, so they wouldn't have to pay mortgage insurance. The number was breathtaking, $300,000. I remember signing the cashier's check at the bank, my hand trembling slightly. The teller, a young woman, smiled. "Your son is very lucky," she said. I smiled back, a hollow, brittle thing. "Yes," I said. "He is. The gifts and loans were never enough. They were a floor, not a ceiling. Their lifestyle inflated to match the subsidies. Luxury vacations I only saw in glossy magazines, cars with lease payments that were more than my first mortgage, designer clothes, and weekly dinners at restaurants where my own catering company was considered a competitor. I became the silent, invisible benefactor of their perfect life, the one they curated so carefully on social media. I was rarely invited to be a part of it. A call from Liam usually began with a perfunctory, "How are you, Mom?" before pivoting to the real reason. "So, Chloe and I were thinking. The house really needs new landscaping, or a great investment opportunity came up, but we're a little cash poor right now." I was no longer a person. I was a financial plan. I was the solution to a problem, the answer to a question that was always, in some form, about money. And through it all, I said yes. Because he was my son. Because the fear of losing him completely was greater than the pain of being used. I existed in a state of quiet desperation, hoping that one day, he would see. He would wake up and realize what I had done for him, the sacrifices I had made, the dreams I had deferred so his could be realized. I clung to that hope like a shipwreck survivor to a piece of driftwood. It was that hope that allowed me to believe his call, a week before my 60th birthday, was different. He sounded genuinely excited. "Mom, we are taking you out for your birthday," he said. "Somewhere really special. Chloe and I have the perfect gift for you. You're going to love it." For the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel a flicker of joy. Maybe this was it. The turning point. The moment my investment of love and patience would finally pay off. The evening of my birthday arrived, cloaked in a deceptive sense of occasion. I chose my outfit with care, a silk dress in a deep sapphire blue, and a string of pearls my own mother had left me. It was a rare indulgence for me to dress up, as my daily uniform was the practical whites of a chef. I felt a flutter of anticipation, the ghost of the hope I had been nurturing. When I arrived at the restaurant, an impossibly chic place with soaring ceilings and a view of the city skyline, my first small disappointment was waiting. It wasn't just Liam and Chloe. Seated at the best table in the house was Chloe's mother, Brenda, beaming as if she were the guest of honor. Liam stood to kiss my cheek. "Mom, you look great. We thought it would be fun for Brenda to join us to celebrate you." I smiled, the expression feeling tight on my face. Brenda was a woman who sucked the oxygen out of a room. She was loud, effusive, and had a way of turning every conversation back to herself. Tonight was no exception. For the next hour, I listened to a detailed monologue about Brenda and Chloe's upcoming 2-week tour of the Italian coast. They dissected itineraries, debated hotels, and discussed the shopping they planned to do in Milan. Liam chimed in enthusiastically, while I sat, a silent spectator at my own birthday party, pushing a piece of sea bass around my plate. They weren't being malicious, they were simply oblivious. In their world, I was a supporting character, and it didn't occur to them that I might want to have a few lines of my own. A memory from Liam's childhood flashed through my mind. He was 8, and had a small part in a school play. He was tree number 3. He had no lines, and his only job was to stand still on the side of the stage. For the weeks leading up to it, all he could talk about was his role. I made him an elaborate costume from scratch, with branches and hand-sewn leaves. I sat in the front row of the school auditorium, my heart swelling with pride every time the spotlight caught one of his leaves. I had treated his small role as the most important in the play. Now, at my own celebration, I was tree number 3, and no one had even noticed I was on stage. Finally, after the plates were cleared, Liam cleared his throat dramatically. And now, he announced, for the main event. "Happy birthday, Mom." He slid a small, elegantly wrapped box across the table. It was from a very exclusive jeweler, a place whose signature blue bags I'd seen Chloe carry many times. My breath caught. Despite the slow burn of resentment I felt, a part of me, the hopelessly maternal part, was still eager to be delighted. I untied the white ribbon and lifted the lid. Nestled on a bed of black velvet was a diamond ring. It wasn't a subtle piece. A large, cushion-cut diamond was surrounded by a halo of smaller ones, set on a platinum band. It was stunning, ostentatious, and completely unlike anything I would ever choose for myself. "Oh, Liam," I whispered, genuinely taken aback by the extravagance. "It's beautiful. But you shouldn't have." Chloe reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Her smile was wide and self-congratulatory. "We wanted to get you something truly special, Alara. Something to show how much we appreciate everything you do for us." She paused for effect. "Liam used the annual dividend from your investment portfolio to get it. We figured it was your money, so you should have something beautiful to show for it." The air in my lungs turned to ice. The warmth I had felt moments before vanished, replaced by a profound, hollow cold. They hadn't bought me a gift. They had taken my money, converted it into a different form, and presented it to me as a gesture of their love, expecting my gratitude in return. It was the most audacious, and yet, most honest, transaction we had ever had. They had finally stopped pretending. I was not a mother being celebrated. I was a shareholder receiving a distribution, one they had been kind enough to choose for me. I looked from Liam's proud, expectant face to Chloe's smug one. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. And then, Brenda, who had been admiring the ring as I held it, delivered the final, killing blow. She sighed wistfully, her voice laced with manufactured melancholy. "You know, it's the strangest thing," she said, leaning in closer. "That ring looks almost identical to the one my dear late husband gave me for our 20th anniversary. The one I lost on that cruise in the Caribbean last year." I was just devastated. She looked at Chloe. "Remember, honey?" I cried for a week. She reached out and touched my hand, her fingers cool against my skin. "You wear it in good health, Alara. It's a real treasure." That was it. That was the final straw. It wasn't just that they'd used my money for my own gift. It was the breathtaking narcissism of it all. At my birthday dinner, they had managed to make my gift about them. It was a symbol of their generosity, purchased with my funds, that also served as a painful reminder of a loss suffered by Chloe's mother. I was erased from my own story, from my own celebration. I slipped the ring onto my finger. It felt alien, a heavy, cold manacle. I looked at Liam, my son, and for the first time, I didn't see the little boy whose hand-sewn leaf costume I had cherished. I saw a stranger. A handsome, charming stranger who viewed me with a placid, transactional affection. A man who had my eyes but none of my heart. In that moment, something inside me didn't break, it hardened. It fused into something solid and unyielding. The hope I had carried for 30 years finally died, and in its place, a quiet, resolute anger began to grow. I knew, with a certainty that was as absolute as it was terrifying, that I was done. The performance was over. The bank was closing. And this ring, this glittering symbol of their casual cruelty, would be my final severance payment to them. The drive home from the restaurant was a blur of streetlights and silence. The city, usually a vibrant tapestry of light and sound, seemed muted, distant. The only thing that felt real was the weight of the ring on my right hand, a constant, physical reminder of the evening's hollow charade. It didn't sparkle with promise, it glinted with the sharp, cold light of an ending. When I walked into my house, the silence was different. It was no longer the lonely silence of a woman waiting for a phone call, but the peaceful, sovereign silence of a fortress. I walked through the rooms I had designed and paid for, touching the spines of the books I had collected, looking at the art I had chosen. This was my life, my creation. For too long, I had allowed it to be treated as a holding company for my son's future. That night, sleep was not an option. My mind was fiercely, terrifyingly clear. I made a pot of strong, black coffee and walked into my office. I sat down at the large oak desk where I ran my empire, and I turned on my computer. I opened a new spreadsheet. For years, I had deliberately avoided this, avoided tallying the true cost of my son's life, because I was afraid of the number I would find. I was afraid of what that number would say about me, about him, about our relationship. But that night, I was not afraid. I was a surgeon preparing for an excision, and I needed to know the full extent of the disease. I started with college. 4 years of tuition, room, board, and his allowance. I pulled up the old bank statements, the numbers glowing starkly on the screen. It was just over $400,000. Then, the failed startup. The $50,000 seed money was easy to find. But then I dug deeper, finding the dozens of smaller transfers, the emergency funds to cover server costs, or a last-minute business trip that never yielded a single client. Another $27,000. Next, the wedding. I had paid for the entire thing, a lavish affair for 200 guests at a historic hotel. Liam and Chloe had assured me her parents were contributing, but in the end, Brenda had tearfully confessed they were having financial troubles, and of course, I had stepped in. Another $150,000. The line items kept coming, a relentless cascade of figures. The $300,000 down payment on their house. The $75,000 to invest in a friend's restaurant that folded 6 months later. The annual gifts of $20,000 each Christmas. The countless credit card bills I had paid off, the vacations, the cars, the clothes. I worked through the night, fueled by coffee and a righteous fury that was as clean and hot as a blacksmith's forge. As the sun began to stream through my office window, I hit the sum function. The number that appeared at the bottom of the column made me gasp. It was a figure so large, so obscene, it looked like a misprint. Over the course of 12 years, since he had started college, I had given my son, Liam, $1,742,000. I stared at the screen, not with anger or regret, but with a profound, chilling clarity. This wasn't love. It was a bailout. A perpetual, unending bailout. I had not been a mother, I had been the Federal Reserve. I stood up and walked to my bedroom, the spreadsheet still burning on the screen in my office. I looked at the ring, sitting on my nightstand where I had placed it. It was worth $5,000, according to the appraisal certificate tucked into the box. A pittance compared to the total. And then I knew exactly what I had to do. There would be no dramatic confrontation, no screaming match. My son and his family didn't operate on a plane of genuine emotion, they operated on a plane of transactions and appearances. And so, my response would be in a language they understood. I showered, dressed in a simple, elegant pantsuit, and slipped the diamond ring into my pocket. I didn't call first. I drove the 20 minutes to their perfect house in their perfect gated community. As I pulled up, I saw Chloe's car in the driveway, alongside Brenda's. Perfect. I walked up the stone pathway and rang the bell. Chloe opened the door, a look of surprise on her face. Mom? What are you doing here? Hello, Chloe, I said calmly. Is your mother here? I have something for her. Chloe led me into the living room, where Brenda was sitting on their white linen sofa, sipping a latte. They had been looking at travel brochures for their Italian trip. Brenda looked up, her smile practiced. Elara. What a lovely surprise. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I walked directly over to her, reached into my pocket, and pulled out the ring. Brenda, I began, my voice even and clear. Last night, you mentioned that this ring was a painful reminder of the one you lost. It occurred to me that it might bring you more comfort than it could ever bring me. I held it out to her. Please take it. A gift? From me to you. Brenda stared at the ring in my outstretched hand, her mouth slightly agape. Chloe looked from me to her mother, her expression a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. I couldn't possibly, Brenda stammered, the picture of flustered modesty. Oh, but I insist, I said, my voice hardening just a fraction. My birthday gift to myself this year is the gift of simplification. And this, I said, my eyes sweeping around their beautifully appointed, expensively furnished, and entirely subsidized home, is the first step. I took Brenda's hand, which was limp with shock, and I placed the heavy diamond ring into her palm, closing her fingers around it. Enjoy your trip to Italy, I said. Then, I turned to my son and his wife. They were both standing now, frozen. Liam? Chloe, I said, my tone now utterly devoid of warmth. Effective immediately, the bank of Mom is permanently closed. There will be no more loans, no more gifts, no more investments, and no more bailouts. All outstanding loans will be formally called in by my lawyer next week. I suggest you get your finances in order. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the house, leaving them standing in the silent, sun-drenched living room, with a $5,000 diamond ring, and a $1.7 million debt. I didn't look back. As I closed their front door behind me, the click of the latch was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of my own freedom. The fallout was immediate and spectacular, a perfect storm of entitlement and indignation. My phone began ringing before I had even pulled out of their gated community. The caller ID flashed Liam. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a text message appeared. Call me now. What the hell was that? I ignored it. I drove not home, but to the office of my oldest friend, Sarah. Sarah is a divorce lawyer, a woman who has seen the absolute worst of human relationships and has come out the other side with her wit and wisdom not just intact, but sharpened to a razor's edge. I walked into her office, sat down, and for the first time that day, I let out a long, shuddering breath. I told her everything. The dinner. The ring. The spreadsheet. The grand total. The scene I had just caused at Liam's house. She listened intently, her expression shifting from sympathy to a kind of fierce pride. When I finished, she leaned back in her leather chair and steepled her fingers. Elara, she said, her voice rich with conviction. You didn't just close a bank. You liberated an occupied territory. And that territory, she said, pointing a pen at my heart, is you. She was the ally I needed, the external validation that blew away the last lingering wisps of guilt. That afternoon, under her guidance, I took concrete steps. We called my financial advisor, and had Liam and Chloe's names removed from any account where they had access. We cancelled the supplementary credit cards. Sarah drafted a formal letter, to be sent the following week, outlining the outstanding loans and a proposed repayment schedule, making it clear this was not a request. By the time I got home that evening, I had a dozen missed calls and a string of increasingly frantic text messages. They ranged from bewildered, "Mom, are you okay? This is so weird," to angry, "How could you embarrass Brenda like that? She was your guest," to manipulative, "Chloe is crying. She thinks you hate her. You need to fix this." I read them with a strange sense of detachment, as if I were a researcher studying the behavior of a distant, unfamiliar species. The real confrontation came 2 days later. I was in my garden, pruning my rose bushes, when their car pulled aggressively into my driveway. They hadn't called. They stormed out of the car and marched towards me, their faces thunderous. Liam spoke first, his voice shaking with a rage I had never seen from him. "What is your problem?" he demanded. "You show up, throw a ring at Brenda, and then you cut me off. After everything. I'm your son." I put down my pruning shears and took off my gardening gloves, wiping my hands on my apron. I looked at him, truly looked at him, and felt a profound sadness beneath my anger. "Yes, you are my son," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "And for 30 years, I have been your mother. But for the last 12, I have also been your financier, your underwriter, and your unconditional line of credit. I have decided to retire from those roles. I'm keeping the job of mother, but the job description is changing." Chloe stepped forward, her eyes flashing. "This is about the ring, isn't it? You're being so materialistic. We got you a beautiful gift, and you're throwing it in our faces because you're angry about money." The sheer, unadulterated hypocrisy of her statement was almost breathtaking. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. "Chloe, let's be very clear," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous calm. "You didn't get me a gift. You took my money, from my investments, and used it to buy an item. It was a transaction. A thoughtless, self-congratulatory transaction that you somehow managed to make about your own mother's sentimental baggage. The ring isn't the problem. The ring is a symptom of the disease." "What disease?" Liam yelled. "The disease of entitlement," I shot back, my own voice finally rising. "The belief that my success is your birthright. The assumption that my life's work is nothing more than a trust fund for you to dip into whenever you want a new car, or a trip to Italy. The spreadsheet I created the other night, Liam. The one that totals $1,742,000. That's the disease." He flinched as if I had struck him. The number, spoken aloud, had a physical power. Chloe paled. That's not right," she stammered. "The house was a gift. The wedding was a gift. They were contributions to a lifestyle you couldn't afford," I corrected her. "They were enabled by my silence and my misguided hope that one day, you would stand on your own 2 feet. I have finally realized you will never stand on your own as long as I am holding you up." Liam's anger curdled into a kind of desperate pleading. "But we are family, Mom. This is what families do. They help each other. There is a difference between helping and endlessly subsidizing." "Liam," I said, the words feeling truer than anything I had ever spoken. "Helping is giving someone a hand up. Subsidizing is paying for their entire existence so they never learn to climb. I am done. The joint accounts are closed. The credit cards are cancelled. Sarah's letter is already in the mail. You are both intelligent, capable adults. It's time you started acting like it." He stared at me, his face a canvas of disbelief and betrayal. In his eyes, I was the villain. I was the one who had broken the unspoken contract. I had changed the rules of a game he didn't even know he was playing. "You'll regret this," he said, his voice low. "You'll end up old and alone." It was his last, most potent weapon, the threat of my loneliness. And for a second, it almost found its mark. The fear of a solitary future was a familiar ghost. But then I looked past him, at my beautiful garden, at the house I had built, at the life that was wholly and completely mine. And I knew he was wrong. I had been alone for years, sitting at their table. "No, Liam," I said softly. "I'm not alone. I'm just finally by myself. There's a difference." I turned my back on them, picked up my shears, and deliberately, methodically, pruned a perfect, blood-red rose. I did not watch them leave. I listened to the sound of their car engine, a furious roar that faded into the distance, leaving behind only the gentle peace of my garden. The days that followed were defined by a profound and unnerving silence. The constant hum of anxiety that had been the background music of my life for years was gone, and its absence was deafening. There were no calls, no texts, no unexpected financial emergencies. The silence was both a relief and a burden. In the quiet moments, the ghost of my son's final words would echo, "You'll end up old and alone." I had to consciously fight the ingrained fear that he was right. My friend Sarah was my rock. She insisted I not spend my evenings alone. We had dinners, went to the theater, and took long walks. She didn't let me wallow. She helped me rediscover the woman I was outside of being a mother and a provider. One evening, over a bottle of wine, she looked at me and said, "You know what that $1.7 million represents, Alara? It's not just money. It's deferred dreams. It's trips you didn't take, risks you didn't run with your business, passions you didn't pursue. It's time to cash in your own investments." Her words struck a chord deep inside me. For years, my business had been a well-oiled machine, profitable and stable, but I had stopped innovating. I had been too focused on preserving capital for Liam's next crisis. The next morning, I went into my company's headquarters with a new energy. I called a meeting with my top chefs and managers. I laid out a bold new vision, a new line of gourmet retail products, an expansion of our event space, an AA mentorship program for young, underprivileged culinary students. My team, who had been running the day-to-day for so long, was electric with excitement. The business, my first baby, came roaring back to life, and so did I. I threw myself into the work with a passion I hadn't felt in 20 years. The healing came in small, unexpected waves. It was the joy of tasting a new sauce my chefs had perfected. It was the satisfaction of seeing a young intern from our mentorship program flourish. It was taking a solo trip to Paris, something I had always dreamed of, and sitting in a cafe, sipping coffee, and feeling completely, utterly content in my own company. I was not lonely, I was free. I was replacing the toxic, demanding presence of my son's family with the fulfilling presence of my own purpose. I started a small foundation with the money that would have been siphoned off for another of Liam's failed ventures. We provided seed grants and business coaching to aspiring female entrepreneurs. I was finally investing in people who wanted a hand up, not a handout. The vindication, when it came, was quiet and deeply validating. About 8 months after the cutoff, I received a letter from a law firm I didn't recognize. It was from Liam and Chloe. They were in dire financial straits. Their adjustable rate mortgage had reset, their credit card debt was crippling, and without my support, their lifestyle had crumbled. The letter was a thinly veiled threat, arguing that I had established a pattern of financial support that constituted an implied familiar duty, and that they intended to sue me for support. I handed the letter to Sarah. She laughed. A loud, genuine, booming laugh. "Oh, this is delicious," she said. "This is the legal equivalent of a toddler throwing a tantrum in the cereal aisle." She drafted a response that was a masterpiece of legal devastation. It included a copy of my spreadsheet, notarized bank statements, and a counterclaim for the repayment of the outstanding formal loans. It stated, in no uncertain terms, that any legal action on their part would be met with a vigorous and public defense. We never heard from their lawyer again. The final piece of the story came from a distant cousin who called me a year after the confrontation. She told me, hesitantly, that Liam and Chloe had sold the house at a loss and moved into a small apartment. Liam had finally gotten a job, an entry-level sales position he hated. Chloe was working as a receptionist. Brenda, my cousin added with a touch of schadenfreude, had tried to return the diamond ring for cash, only to be told it was a high-quality, but lab-grown diamond, worth only a fraction of what a natural one would be. Liam and Chloe hadn't just used my money, they had cheaped out on the gesture itself. The irony was so perfect, so bitter, I couldn't help but let out a dry laugh. A year to the day after that fateful birthday dinner, I hosted a party for my 61st. It wasn't at a flashy restaurant. It was in my garden, which was in full, glorious bloom. My guests were my chosen family, Sarah, my key staff from the business, the first 2 recipients of my foundation's grants, and a few other dear friends. The air was filled with laughter and the smell of jasmine. Sarah handed me a small gift. Inside was a first edition of a book by my favorite author, a book I had been searching for years. It was thoughtful, personal, and it cost next to nothing. It was the most precious gift I had ever received. As I stood there, surrounded by people who saw me, who valued me for who I was and not what I had, I felt a sense of peace that was so profound it felt like coming home. I had not ended up old and alone. I had ended up whole. My name is Alara, and I built a life from scratch. And after years of letting others try to claim it, I finally claimed it for myself. What I did was not easy. Severing ties with a child, even an adult one, feels like tearing a part of yourself away. But sometimes, the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and for them, is to let go. You must teach people how you want to be treated, and sometimes that lesson requires a final exam. My son failed his, but in doing so, he allowed me to graduate with honors into the rest of my life. What would you have done in my situation? Is there a point where familial love must be protected by firm, unbreakable boundaries? Share your thoughts below, because these are not just stories, they are lessons we can all learn from.